Okay, I know when it comes to conflict and geopolitics, I don't often actually delve into these things, but let me just tell you guys. There was supposedly a ceasefire in between the United States and Iran, right? Supposedly, this would actually calm down all the fighting, all the bombing. It's not boots on the ground against boots on the ground. Basically, this is just stopping all airstrikes, stopping all missile strikes and artillery strikes of the United States against Iran, okay? And potentially also stopping retaliatory strikes from Iran against allied or partner U.S. influenced Middle Eastern states, right? Okay, just bear with me here. Bear with me here. There was supposedly that ceasefire, but Israel is still attacking Lebanon, a key ally of Iran. And apparently Israel is not stopping. I'm actually confirming that the incidences are just ramping up. 10 minutes, 100 airstrikes. Israel rejects ceasefire for Lebanon, kills there's now 250 plus in a massive attack. And yeah, he's basically Benjamin Netanyahu is not taking any chances. They're not taking any chances. It doesn't matter if Donald Trump gets into a ceasefire. He's gonna really just stick into this 10-point plan as he said. But did he really mean it? And did he really stop? Did he really let Israel be and let them go? Let the IDF go ham against Lebanon? Is it really a trap? Because there have been rumors that Trump only agreed to a ceasefire to sneak Israel in for an attack against Lebanon, which killed 200 plus within 10 minutes of doing 100 airstrikes. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. No freaking way. 10 minutes, 100 airstrikes. Israel rejects ceasefire for Lebanon. Yep, here we go. Less than 1 day after the Trump admin agreed to a 2-week ceasefire deal with Iran, Israel struck Lebanon in its heaviest and deadliest attack on the country since the United States-Israeli war on Iran began. At least 250 deaths have been reported. Israeli and U.S. authorities are insisting that the ceasefire proposal did not include Lebanon, where Israel says it is targeting Hezbollah. Iran and Pakistan, which brokered the deal, says the agreed upon pause in hostilities applied to both countries. Now, even Pakistan says that it applied to both countries, both Iran and Lebanon. Yeah, this is not looking good for Trump. Yeah, this is not looking good for Trump. Yeah. Since Israel's bloody taking and assault against Gaza, the silence of states and the continued flow of weapons has only emboldened Israel, says Beirut-based Human Rights Watch researcher Ramzi Kais. The response from the international community has been limited by words of condemnation, but no effective action has been taken yet in order to stop these atrocities from happening. Lebanon has declared a day of mourning after Israeli attacks on Wednesday killed it took the lives of 200 plus people and injured 1,000 others. At one point, Israel launched 100 strikes in just 10 minutes. That's insane. That is insane. So Iran and Pakistan had included. Okay, hold on. Oh shit. Iran's 10-point plan broadly calls for ending attacks on Iran and its allies. Iran's 10-point ceasefire plan, which Trump had agreed to. Immediate ceasefire on all fronts. It's not just US and Iran. That means nations to allied nations and states of Iran as well. That means even with Lebanon. That is number one. And all regional conflicts. Number two. That is supposedly to make it absolutely clear. So, and all regional conflicts. It's not just Iran. How hard is it to understand this? How hard is it to actually understand this? Permanent halt to attacks on Iran, probably in the United States, doesn't have a hard time on that one. Here's the problem when it comes to the Trump admin. Unless the ceasefire is in full effect and all terms have been agreed to, No one is opening the Strait of Hormuz. No one is opening it. But since Israel had started the attacks on Lebanon, disregarding the terms of the ceasefire, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. This is supposedly point number 4, reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Number 5, guarantee safe maritime navigation in the strait. That's not happening. Not with Israel attacking Lebanon. Number 6, lift all sanctions on Iran, primary and secondary. Is the United States working on that? I doubt it. I know Trump is even stopping Benjamin Netanyahu. Number 7, and United Nations and IAEA sanctions / investigations. I'm not sure if that's being worked on. Number 8, release frozen Iranian assets held abroad. I'm not sure that's been worked on. Number 9, full war reparations paid to Iran. I don't know if the United States is going to. Number 10, security guarantee / non-aggression pact and recognition of Iran's rights, including nuclear enrichment in some versions. Yeah. Point number 2, end all regional conflicts is why Iran claims Lebanon is included. The US / Israel reject that interpretation. Yeah. That's not good. This is a major escalation. 200 plus casualties. Okay? This 200 plus casualties. It's supposed to target Hezbollah. This is supposedly about targeting Hezbollah. A rapid strike wave, 100 strikes in minutes, signals a pre-planned escalation, not retaliation. High casualties, 200 plus, could increase pressure for immediate retaliation. Hezbollah could respond with rockets into Israel, widening the conflict fast. The ceasefire is fragile at best, symbolic at worst. So, we're basically looking at a situation where one side says regional ceasefire, the other side says limited ceasefire. That mismatch is how wars restart. So, bruh, we screwed. Fuck me. So this ceasefire is gonna be null and void. The number 2 point has been violated under the 10-point plan. Iran is absolutely going to invalidate the ceasefire. This is not, my opinion. Iran's president says Israeli strikes render negotiations meaningless. Iran warns its hands remain on the trigger. Officials are signaling the ceasefire is already being undermined. This is not a formal cancellation, but it's one step away from it. Yep, Hezbollah has already resumed rocket attacks. So the ceasefire is being ignored in practice, even if not officially canceled. But still, at the moment, Iran still has a couple of options from here. Invalidate the ceasefire outright. It's very possible now. They can stay in it, but retaliate anyway. It's already happening indirectly. And then use this to justify a bigger escalation later, which we don't want. And it could expand. It could potentially expand past Middle Eastern regions. We don't want that to happen. Why does this have to happen? Just why? So this is turning into a ceasefire on paper, but the conflict just goes on. And historically, those don't last long, sir. Yep. I even gave the article from Democracy Now! And yeah. So 200 to 250 pass away from these strikes, 1,000 plus injured. Strikes hit densely populated civilian areas, not just military targets. Populated civilian areas were done for. This was a shock and awe style strike inside Lebanon. And strategically, it directly contradicts Iran's version of the ceasefire. It tests Iran's red line, protecting allies like Hezbollah. It forces Iran to respond or lose credibility. At this point, the ceasefire is already functionally dead. Iran doesn't need to officially cancel it anymore because their allies are being hit at scale. Civilians are dying in large numbers. Diplomats are openly calling it a violation. Either party can already resume retaliation. Either Hezbollah or Iran starts to retaliate. It's just not good. It is progressively becoming a worse thing. It is entirely becoming a worse thing. DEFCON 3, guys. The United States has initiated Roundhouse. We're screwed. We are screwed, guys. We're actually screwed. I'm going to check the stream on CNN News 18, but I'm not going to show the video from it. I'm just going to let you guys hear the audio.
Been pushing him for that. We just heard in the last few minutes, speaking to NBC, that he spoke with Bibi. He says here, I spoke with Bibi and he's going to low-key it. I just think we have to be sort of a little more low-key, and that was a quote. At this moment, there's no indication that this means a temporary ceasefire while talks are ongoing. It's quite the contrary. How do you see this moment? How do you assess this, given the talks, of course, that Lena was discussing in Islamabad over the weekend?
Yeah, it's great to be with you again. The way I look at this is that this is an essential step by the Trump administration to really run these negotiations. And Israel could have basically played the role of spoiler in this particular case. And it's essential for the United States, from President Trump's point of view, that not happen. The Israelis and the U.S. do have divergent goals in mind here. And that's, I think, one of the key things that we have to really understand. On the one hand, the Israelis want actual regime change in Iran, and they look at Hezbollah is definitely related and definitely an Iranian proxy, but they also see it as an independent force in many respects, and they see any type of ceasefire in Iran as being an area where they can potentially take advantage of that and prosecute a war, or at least some attacks against forces like Hezbollah. And in this particular case, that really is not what the United States needs, because the Iranians do view this as a Middle East-wide ceasefire effort, and they want that to happen, and perhaps so that they can regroup, but also in a way so that they can really maximize any possible benefits for themselves and for their proxies from any negotiations in Islamabad or any other place that they might occur.
Yeah, and we heard that, in fact, this time yesterday from the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, who's basically saying that he wouldn't entertain a ceasefire unless Lebanon was actually included in his proposals. Let me back to Hezbollah, because I think this is important. We had heard previously, Colonel, that the Lebanese government didn't have the ability. Critics may go as far as to say they didn't even have the desire to disarm Hezbollah. How do you assess the challenge here? Because Hezbollah has been degraded, as we've been reported, has been weakened, but clearly not disarmed. What we have seen, continues to see strikes even today on Israel. Just frame that for us.
Yeah, so Hezbollah is still a very potent force, Isa. And, when you look at the way in which they've conducted their operations, just like the Iranians, they are very good at basically asymmetric warfare. Even the effects of the pager attack and the decimation of Hezbollah's leadership has really not resulted in an elimination of that group as a danger to Israel. That's why the Israelis want to move forward and control southern Lebanon. They want to control the area at least up to the Litani River and perhaps even beyond that. And they do that, they want to do that for the security of northern Israel's population. At least that's how they see it. But as far as the Lebanese government is concerned, they have a better, at this particular moment in time, to be able to control Hezbollah and to limit Hezbollah's activities against Israel. However, they still have significant challenges in doing so, in spite of Hezbollah's weakness compared to how it was just a year or two ago. There's still an important force in Lebanon to control vast territory within this country, and they also control a large portion of the population. So Hezbollah is a potent force within Lebanese politics, and for the Lebanese government to be able to control them, it's going to be more a factor of negotiation within Lebanon as opposed to actually using physical force against Hezbollah. And that's going to be, I think, difficult to achieve.
Well, returning to our top story, the fragile truce in the Middle East, events are really developing on two fronts this hour. Front one is Pakistan, where Iranian and US negotiators are due to meet over the weekend in an effort, of course, to hammer out a lasting ceasefire. Front two, as we told you at the top of the show, is Lebanon, which Israel has been pounding heavily this week. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he wants to hold direct talks with Lebanese leaders about reaching a peace. But at the same time, the Israeli military has issued evacuation orders for parts of Beirut. Anad Bashir is in Beirut for us this hour in Lebanon. So, Nada, peace talks, but no ceasefire, and talks, it seems, that will be held under fire. How is this being received where you are?
Well, look, you said the Lebanese government has...
It looks like people who are actually just watching certain media outlets are actually looking at this in one way. They don't look at they don't look at web monitors. They don't look at different articles coming out from different sources. They don't even. Okay, let's just be real. News that's coming from different sources can give us mental gymnastics, but that's how we navigate. That's how we navigate through different sources to find out which ones are actually more true than the usual. CNN is not reporting on everything. Okay, I'm not by that. They're just trying to play their political bottom at the moment. Okay, that's how CNN has always worked. On international terms, they're balanced, a bit unlike in the United States. Unfortunately, that actually is happening. And we're actually just making sure to get all information out in regards to this entire thing. This ceasefire being violated by Israel is just not good. Yes, it's just not good. I also check out different sources from, like, on Al Jazeera. I'm just going to check this one. Hold on.
This is America, and this is the former Iranian embassy in Washington, a sealed time capsule abandoned since the 1979 revolution. Now, at this juncture, the U.S. and Iran are far from reestablishing diplomatic ties. But is the ceasefire and Trump's suggestion of working together with Iran meaningful steps? I'll be back later with more on that. But first, here's Anna Burns-Francis in our Washington studio.
Thanks, Heidi. Peace through strength, the White House says. But with only a tentative ceasefire in place, will peace be achieved through concessions or more conflict? Kimberly Halkett is at the White House today, and Richard Gaisford is live for us at the State Department. The most important 2 days are ahead, with negotiations between the United States and Iran due this weekend. America hasn't openly published its list of demands, but the president and his team have been keen to remind the public why the country went to war.
It has always been the policy of the United States, in particular, my administration, that this terrorist regime can never have a nuclear weapon. You know, we got regime change. We're dealing with a much different regime than before.
He does not see the context of Iran, why they're angry against the United States in the first place, why they're angry against Westerners in the first place. He doesn't explain the 50s and then the Iranian Revolution that toppled the Western installed Shah. Okay? He does not explain all this context. He's lying. If he only explained the context as to why Iran has this anger in the first place, he is just lying. Bold-faced here. He always does this. And now it's gone to worse. It's gone to the point that he would lie to save his own image here. Okay? He would just lie to save his own image here, thinking that people are not going to see through this.
With different people, and if we could do something, but they have to open it up there. Harmless.
When Iran counteroffered the 15-point American plan with its own list of 10 demands, Donald Trump said they were workable and reasonable. But then his press secretary said the list was thrown in the garbage.
And the idea that President Trump would ever accept an Iranian wish list as a deal is completely absurd. The president will only make a deal that serves in the best interests of the United States of America.
What are those interests? Here's a reminder of where America and Iran lie in terms of negotiating a peace deal. Each side's conditions for ending the war have been broadly outlined, and while Washington's list hasn't been exclusively published, it's clear there are major differences in demands. US media leaks suggest America is open to discussing sanctions relief, while Iran is demanding the lifting of some sanctions. The US says Tehran must never develop a nuclear weapon and must stop the enrichment of uranium. Tehran reportedly demands its nuclear program be accepted.
Here's the thing. Iran has every right to start building a deterrent against the West, simply because they are being threatened repeatedly by the West. Unfortunately, look, I'm not entirely with Iran because they are building a nuclear weapon, and it's actually hold on. They're not confirmed to build nuclear weapons, but they're confirmed to actually own nuclear material, but they're not being used for weapons testing of any kind because it has not been entirely confirmed if there is ever weapons testing. So they have nuclear material, they have the smarts for it. Is that the main basis for it to be called nuclear weapons testing? Because let's just be real, Iran has every right to actually build these weapons, but they're being prevented from building these. They're prevented from being building these weapons, and there's no concrete of them even having a possessed weapon anyway. Now I get it that Israel and the United States don't want to wait. It's mostly Israel who doesn't want to wait. They want to strike first before there is even a conception of a weapon at all built in Iran. They want to do that. They're risking themselves. They're risking others. But I think this is for political messaging only. I think this only strengthens political messaging. It doesn't boost common sense tactics. It does not help Israel. And considering that the United States, basically Trump himself, listens to Israel all the time, it never helps them either. And so the United States was pulled into a conflict that Israel had supposedly pitched to the United States, which Trump accepted on behalf. Okay? Just because the U.S. president represents the will of the American people. Not entirely true. He doesn't hold the will of the entire American populace. No. We've seen it. There is the United States entirely because of Donald Trump's domestic actions and foreign policy as well. Americans are divided on this, and those who are against it are pushing for his impeachment and removal as a result of his actions. And to think that Trump would actually try to save civilians, Iranian civilians. Iran's civilian populace is embedded within Iran. What can Trump to save these civilians from getting harmed by by personnel of the IRGC? There's little thing he can do. There's not much when it comes to this thing. So who is he fooling? Who in this world is he actually fooling? He's not fool. He never fooled me. He should fool the more intelligent people too. In fact, he just keeps all the non-intelligent people by his side in his ear, and they tell him what to do next. He only surrounds himself with yes men and morons, and he basically just doesn't listen to the more intelligent ones. It's not in his genetics. It's just not, and it's not in mine either. Also, he's an old man. An old man doesn't listen to his aides. He doesn't listen to his aides. It's never going to work well for the United States at this point. As long as they are tied entirely with Israel. Entirely. So the only choice that America has right now, just to actually get out of Iran entirely, is publicly denounce ally. But is that going to happen anytime soon? Especially when Trump is holding on to power and holding on to dear life? No, that's not going to happen. So whether Trump is removed from office or whether he leaves office up to term, nothing is going to change his mind. Nothing. He'll just be living alone in misery. Okay? He will be living alone, and his name would be stained. The legacy would be stained. His entire family would become unwanted. And you know what? I prefer that.
The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is also a key US demand. Tehran says it needs a guarantee that Iran maintains control over the waterway. The US also wants Iran to end its support for the likes of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. But Iran is demanding the US and Israel stop the war on all fronts, including fighting against those groups, which are its regional allies. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, is now the one spearheading those negotiations. For more on where the talks will go, we're joined by our correspondents, Kimberly Halkett at the White House and Richard Gaisford at the State Department. Kimberly, I'll start with you. J.D. Vance has been shoulder-tapped to lead these talks. Why?
Well, what we know from the information coming out of the White House is there are a number of reasons why J.D. Vance has been tapped for this. The first is that the U.S. president believes that he has been pivotal, given the fact that he has been quietly shouldering some of the back-channel discussions between the United States, Israel, and Iran. And so, as a result, he is the most likely person to lead this endeavor. But also, we know that this is a signal that the U.S. president is putting an enormous amount of importance on seeing the success of these talks. In other words, putting J.D. Vance at the helm of the delegation elevates this and is a signal or gesture to Iran of the significance. We should point out some of the most significant talks between the two nations in decades. Now, having said that, there's also a recognition of a deficit in trust between the parties. And so as a result, given the fact that the Middle East envoys Jared Kushner as well as Steve Witkoff were involved in negotiations that ultimately ended up breaking out in military conflict, there is a desire to try and reduce the lack of trust between the parties by putting someone else in charge. So there is an awareness that the former negotiators were more aligned with Israel. J.D. Vance is seen as not only being more neutral, but also having better decision-making authority.
Well, Richard, I'll bring you in here when we talk about who gets to be in charge or leading these talks. The State Department usually is the one responsible for setting political agenda. So where's Marco Rubio in the lead up to these talks?
Yeah, ordinarily, Anna, you're right. You would expect Marco Rubio and the State Department to be right at the centre of all these events. But the Secretary of State's been pretty quiet recently. We saw him yesterday here at the State Department welcoming Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, but no questions answered at all. Nothing said in front of cameras before that meeting. And what we've seen over the last few days, absolutely nothing from the Secretary of State on social media since Easter, when he talked about Easter and the ability of America to go into Iran and pick up those two pilots. So it seems to be taken out of the State Department's hands. Instead, we have J.D. Vance, as you've been talking about, heading off to lead these talks, accompanied by Steve Witkoff, who, of course, is the millionaire property developer friend of Donald Trump, employed directly by the White House, and Jared Kushner, who is Trump's son-in-law, another millionaire, an investment banker who's working as a volunteer. So none of them answering to the State Department, where you might expect there to be some sort of diplomatic frenzy at the moment. They may well be behind the scenes trying to clear up that confusion that J.D. Vance has been talking about. Certainly too, fielding calls from allies, trying to get their wants and needs as part of these negotiations. Problem is, if this top team isn't hearing them, Anna, you do wonder how successful these negotiations might be on behalf of those allies.
Richard Gaisford at the State Department, Kimberly Halkett at the White House. Thank you both. Iran's original plan to end the war looked like it had been written by ChatGPT. At least that's what the US Vice President claimed. But as both sides head to Islamabad, key demands from either party could scupper talks at any point, as Phil Lavelle explains from the State Department.
A question a lot of people are asking this place, the State Department. What does that word, victory, actually mean? Well, there's your definition. A success, triumph, or superiority achieved over an opponent. The final and complete overcoming of a challenge. But is this challenge over? Really? President Trump says it is, claiming the US has won a total and complete victory.
And we all know that's a lie because Iran's defenses were still up. Basically, they were still able to shoot down aircraft. I mean, if shooting down aircraft and actually putting its crew in danger because of that just doesn't tell you that Iran's air defenses are still up. If it tells you that, what kind of news are you actually looking into, and what kind of sources are you blindly agreeing are actually just true without looking at every other source? That's just, wow. Yeah.
A sentiment echoed by his defense secretary.
Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield. A capital V military victory.
Try telling that to the Iranians, who claim they came out on top. Their vice president saying this 40-day war was not merely a military victory, but a turning point in changing strategic equations in the region and the world. Fact is, this is a precarious ceasefire. US Vice President J.D. Vance called it a fragile truce. both sides have their competing demands. The US with its 15-point plan, Iran responding with a 10-point version, apparently its second attempt, because
The Iranians originally put forward a 10-point plan that was fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and completely discarded. It was literally thrown in the garbage by President Trump and his negotiating team.
And there are a lot of red lines here. For the US, Iran's nuclear ambitions is one of them. Iran has a stockpile of near-weapons-grade, highly enriched uranium. And weapons, which Americans were told could soon be used to attack them. Iran has always maintained it is not seeking to build a weapon, and it is for peaceful purposes.
Iran's nuclear doctrine has been a peaceful one, and we have always sought, and still seek, to exercise our rights to benefit from peaceful nuclear energy.
President Trump now claims that stockpile would be taken care of in a peace deal. Iran has a ballistic missile program, which Washington wants eliminated. Lots of US combat forces are also based in the Middle East. Iran wants them gone. Then there is the Strait of Hormuz. That is one of the biggest sticking points. 20% of global oil and LNG goes through this narrow waterway, or it did, until Iran blocked it. Now Tehran's controlling who goes through and wants them to pay for the privilege. It's after cash to rebuild the damage caused by the US and Israel's bombs. Plus, there are resolutions. There are lots against Iran, the IAEA, the UN. Iran wants them ended, along with all sanctions. The US Vice President is due to be at those talks in Islamabad representing the US, but it won't be straightforward, as Obama's Secretary of State John Kerry found out back in 2015 as he worked on the original nuclear deal, pictured deep in thought here, contemplating America's next move. Because so much of this is about strategy, and the clock is quite literally counting down day by day as we wait to see if this pause does indeed become permanent. Phil Lavelle, Al Jazeera, at the State Department.
So, still a way to go to find common ground. Joining me today to discuss what that might look like is Victoria Taylor, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iraq and Iran, and Kenneth Katzman, a former Iran analyst at the Congressional Research Service. Thank you both for joining me today. Victoria, will this ceasefire hold?
I think this is an extremely fragile ceasefire, and the way that I view it is not really as a framework for negotiations, but more of an off-ramp. Of course, within the span...
Yes, it is. It's going to be an off-ramp always.
Destroy a civilization, and then we moved very quickly to the ceasefire. I think there's complications to reaching a deal and to making this ceasefire stick. The 10 points from the Iranians have almost zero overlap with the 15 points originally presented by the United States. So I think there's a long road ahead.
I'm not getting a huge sense of optimism from you then, Kenneth. Are you on the same page?
You're not going to get more optimism from me either. But, Iran still has, the war did not really change any of Iran's positions. Iran is still insisting on being able to enrich uranium. They are still refusing to give up the stockpile of enriched 60% enriched uranium. They're now, according to their version, they're insisting the U.S. basically leave the Middle East, which is not going to happen. But there is what gives us potentially cause for optimism is there seems to be a tug of war between hardliners and more pragmatic elements in Iran, and that's what produced the ceasefire. And I'm seeing evidence of that play out.
I guess there's a line here, whereas it's not just the US versus Iran, it's factions within the US administration and within the Iranian leadership as well, to what you concede on and what you will give and take. Do you see, Victoria, any realistic demands from Iran that the US is willing to accept, whether we look at list 10-point number 1, 10-point number 2, any of the demands that are publicly available?
Well, I think the real cause for optimism here is that we did come back for the brink, and there was an agreement from both sides to halt would have been a very dramatic escalation. And I think that's a reflection of domestic political realities in the United States. And I think a reflection of the fact that for both Iran and the United States, escalating the conflict is unlikely to produce a better outcome for either side. In terms of what either side can accept, I think there were negotiations that have occurred throughout the course of this past year on the nuclear program. There may be some common ground that could be found there. What will be harder is the insistence of Iran to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz, which is a real non-starter, not only for the United States, but the countries in the Gulf and many other countries around the world. And I think also the idea that the United States would suddenly withdraw all of its military forces from the Middle East is not something the U.S. would ever consider.
Which presumably, Kenneth, Iran knows, right?
Well, they know, but they feel they're in a strong position because they were able to restrict traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. They feel they have Mr. Trump on the run. But I think what I argued last time when I was here was they may be underestimating Mr. Trump's resolve. Yes, the polls show we shouldn't escalate. Yes, the American people were perhaps against this operation, but I would not underestimate his potential to escalate. He does not want to appear to have caved in or be a loser or have blundered bad.
And thus, Benjamin Netanyahu probably actually diverted all attention from Trump caving in to Israel not honoring the ceasefire because Lebanon is one of Iran's allies, okay? Basically, Trump doesn't want to seem weak. He's just being protected by a bigger asshole.
Badly in this operation, and I think there is still a chance he will escalate if he feels he needs to.
What are then, Victoria, when we talk about, because that sounds like some uncertainty from Kenneth, what are the unknowns about these talks? What specifically should we be looking at and thinking, what does that mean and where does this go?
Well, I think the primary challenge right now, of course, is Lebanon. Is Lebanon part of the ceasefire? Is it not part of the ceasefire?
Iran allies, okay? Number 2 point states clearly.
Does the Israeli agreement to negotiate actually help de-escalate what appears to be another front of this conflict? I think another thing that we need to be looking at is whether Iran even agrees to negotiate on some of the issues that have been core priorities for multiple U.S. administrations, and that's primarily the Iranian possession and use of ballistic missiles, Iran's support to the proxies throughout the region. And those are issues Iran has never agreed could be part of a negotiation.
Iran has agreed to come back to the table, perhaps in some respect here because there is a change in the negotiating team. How important, Kenneth, is it that J.D. Vance is spearheading these talks?
Well, I'm not sure that's necessarily material, but I think, since...
Why not? Because it is a change.
Well, it's a change. I mean, he's sort of leading, but Witkoff and Kushner are still there. But what I think we're underestimating the degree up by that rescue mission last weekend. That was a big humiliation for Iran. The United States basically air base 40 miles outside their second most important city. And they not only couldn't prevent it, they didn't even know about it. And that was, I think, a big shock that I think contributed to bringing them to the table. And I may be mistaken if they think Mr. Trump will not use intervention if he feels he needs to.
Yeah, OK, although that would be a huge step. And the president clearly feels a new strategy is needed when it comes to getting a deal done.
And he thinks part of the strategy is to actually military escalate against civilian soft targets. Maybe Trump is not thinking of that. Israel did. The airstrikes, the 10 minutes airstrike did not have to happen, but it did, and it hit civilians. That's not military. That's not Hezbollah military. That is Israel sneaking a very disgusting one. And I hate the fact that this is not being talked about, or this has not been looked into yet.
The deal, right? How's that moving? Is it okay? The big deal? You see it happening? So if it doesn't happen, I'm blaming J.D. Vance. If it does happen, I'm taking full credit. No, I think it'll be, it has to happen. I think they're desperate.
All Trump just has to do is just speak purely without stating all deceptive intention. That's what Trump just needs to do. Instead, he just frames it as if he's got all the cards. He basically does, but he's playing on life and death here. I would still maintain my view of Donald John Trump as a madman sitting in power. Why he was even allowed to be a nominee in the first place for what he's done, I'm still not sure. Okay? I'm just still not sure.
Perhaps in jest, but has J.D. Vance been given a bit of a hospital pass in terms of trying to actually negotiate a realistic outcome here, Victoria?
I mean, I think it's a very difficult deal, and it was a difficult deal to achieve even ahead of the war. I don't think the terms for the United States dramatically improved, even though the U.S. and Israel really claimed significant military victories. But I would say, the inclusion of J.D. Vance as part of the negotiating team is significant. And I think it's an important signal, not only for the United States to send to the vice president, but it's something the Iranians also welcome. J.D. Vance is known not to be supportive of, a very assertive U.S. military role. Reporting suggests he was not particularly in favor of this war. And so
basically, if the president and the vice president are not willing to extend a war using boots on the ground, basically Trump has every right. Trump will just humor J.D. Vance and just put the actual pressure onto someone else, onto something else, so that it continues the conflict on Iran. Here's the thing. Trump is putting that pressure on Israel instead. And J.D. Vance might actually think that it might be a sort of relief, but they still don't see big picture. Okay? They still don't see the big picture on this. What basically Trump is doing is allowing Israel to engage without thinking of the consequences. Israel bombed a civilian target. Bombed civilian targets. That's not de-escalation. That's a major escalation.
So I think for the Iranians, his inclusion also sends a signal that the U.S. is actually trying to achieve a diplomatic deal.
Kenneth, that reporting about J.D. Vance's position has gone rather far and wide. It is being discussed quite openly. Is that also in some ways a message to the American public and maybe to more mainstream Republicans that this is a sense of pulling back a bit and getting things to a more neutral ground and not escalating this conflict?
Well, I think it's definitely different than having Secretary of State Rubio head the team. I mean, he's got a very different interventionist reputation for obvious reasons, particularly in Latin America. But even in Iran, I think he's much more viewed as perhaps willing to see the benefits of escalation. Vance obviously has been against getting into a quagmire, more appealing much more to the MAGA base of no long wars, no regime change wars. And so that is sending a signal that he might soften the U.S. positions on some points.
Well, J.D. Vance has said that if the Strait of Hormuz isn't reopened, then President Trump will not abide by the terms of the ceasefire.
What the president has also shown is that we still have clear military, diplomatic, and maybe most importantly, we have extraordinary economic leverage. So the president has told us not to use those tools. He's told us to come to the negotiating table. But if the Iranians don't do the exact same thing, they're going to find out that the president of the United States is not one to mess around.
Kenneth, I'll come back to you there because we were just discussing it. What do you make of that breakdown? Because obviously all those things he listed are tools that you do use in a negotiation as well.
Well, I think that comment about, do not mess around, Mr. Trump does not mess around. I think Iran would be wise to listen to that advice. And, I think Mr. Trump is speaking tonight. He may announce more U.S. troops going to the region. That would within his style to ratchet up the pressure as talks are about to begin.
The problem is still the Strait, though, isn't it, Victoria?
Yeah, I think the Strait remains an extremely vexing challenge and one that cannot be solved militarily with great ease. And so I think that's why we also come to a scenario where ultimately in his speech last week, President Trump was basically suggesting that reopening the Straits was not the U.S. problem. And in fact, it was a challenge to be solved by other countries that were more reliant upon it.
Yeah, it has been a mixed message at times. Donald Trump's decision, though, to de-escalate the war with Iran has U.S. media questioning his strategy and how he brought Iran to the table. Was it threats or did he run out of options? Heidi Jo Castro has been canvassing reaction.
I believe he kind of ran out of options, okay?
The U.S. media is not buying Trump's claims of total and complete victory over Iran, not on the left nor on the right. In fact, almost across the board, they're pointing out the uncertainty of the ceasefire. We'll start with the left-leaning MS Now, which featured this panel discussion shortly after the ceasefire was announced. This is a retired four-star Army general who did not mince words on his assessment of Trump.
He is unhinged and incoherent and dangerous. And that whole notion of ending a civilization, which couldn't be done, it was sort of a drama queen kind of pronouncement.
The Washington Post ran this headline: Trump's apocalyptic threat paused war, but fueled debate about his credibility. It goes on to report the president's ultimatum drew condemnation across the political spectrum and intensified open debate about his credibility, morality, and sanity. Now, PBS, that's the Public Broadcasting Service, said much remains unclear after the U.S., Israel, and Iran agreed to a two-week ceasefire. That uncertainty also highlighted by the right-leaning Newsmax, also tempered with some praise. This is Kurt Volker, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO.
Let's all be grateful that President Trump did not try to eliminate a civilization. I think he made the right call. We don't need to go down that road. We need to find a solution. Second, I'm very glad to see that it appears the Iranians have agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
And that last bit was said while the Strait of Hormuz appeared to be open. Its current status has since shifted.
Exactly, because Israel is engaging Lebanon. It still remains closed just because Israel didn't abide to terms. This is supposed to be a peaceful ceasefire plan, but Trump just let Israel do whatever they wanted. It's just, they're not even telling Israel to stop. It's just not.
Just further evidence of the lack of clarity and fragility of the ceasefire.
Kenneth, it's that lack of clarity, isn't it? We can look back and say, well, we can be glad that things didn't happen, but as PBS said, much remains unclear. What kind of uncertainty what does this uncertainty cause then for the rest of the world?
Well, it causes a lot of uncertainty, but, I think there was a lot, whether his comment about civilization is to be taken literally or not, there was a lot of unrest, even on the side, about bombing civilian targets, like power plants, like bridges. There was a lot of rejection of that. But the problem is the president ran out of ways to escalate other than introducing ground troops, which he doesn't want to do. So he had to find other ways to escalate. And so he threatened these civilian targets, which was likely a mistake because that will alienate the very Iranian people we expect to support us and who have.
Yeah, basically, he threatened civilian targets, and then he let Israel actually dump on other civilian targets outside of Iran. But Israel did it on an Iranian ally. So basically, Trump is saving face while Israel takes direct heat. That's not a de-escalation. That is deception at play.
Supported the United States.
NATO head Mark Rutte has been in Washington, D.C., offering alliance help with the conflict, sort of.
If NATO can help, obviously NATO is there. There's no reason to be helpful. Obviously we will, if that is helpful. But I think we have to do it step by step, because also in NATO that requires then an agreement between all the allies to do that. And I think here the exact structure is less important than the speed.
I'll get to that last line in a minute about structure being less important than speed, Victoria. But gosh, that was a bit of a token offer, wasn't it? If it's helpful or if it's useful, is NATO help of any use here?
Well, I think Mark Rutte is walking an extremely careful line here. Of course, the president has issued a lot of threats about NATO, with a lot of people questioning his commitment to remain in NATO. And so it's to the benefit of the Secretary General to be as open as possible to the possibility. However, we've also seen very strong statements from other European countries, many of whom have been highly critical of the U.S. decision to enter this war. And it would be quite difficult not only for NATO to take a firm role in reopening the straits, but also to navigate the politics within the alliance with the other European countries.
It's already bad enough that Trump to be pulled into engaging Iran in the first place, but basically put everyone else's positions in danger in regards to the economy of different regions around the world, just because. So not Trump really just gotten his hand into a cookie jar full of meat ravaging ants. He basically allowed all this to eventually be controlled by Iran simply because he entered into war. He entered into war where and should not have. Premature entry into it never helps a big power like the United States. We don't consider them a powerful country anymore simply because they're changing their ways towards their former values ever since they won the Second World War. Okay?
Kenneth, I'll come to you for some final thoughts there. On the Strait of Hormuz, it is obviously one of the conditions of the ceasefire agreement. Mark Rutte there saying the exact structure of reopening would be less important than speed. What is going to happen? Will that reopen within the next 2 weeks?
Well, I think Mr. Trump feels it has to. I mean, how can he go to the American people and say this was a wise idea if it leaves the Strait of Hormuz closed? He can't argue that. And as I said, he does not want to be seen as having been blundered. And so I think, he's going to have to reopen it one way or the other, and that may involve some violence, unfortunately.
All right. Kenneth Katzman, Victoria Taylor, thank you both for joining me today. The ceasefire between the US and Iran has been picked apart online, with attacks across Lebanon now dominating the discussion. The worried the agreement could already be coming undone. Alex?
Yes!
It all started with news of a ceasefire, and now this. Lebanon.
There it is! There it is! There it is! Thank you, Al Jazeera, for actually pointing this out. Thank you. It's confirmed. It's confirmed now. Israel on engagements against Iranian allies. There it is. The ceasefire is doomed to fail just because Israel is still in engagement. Now, we don't know if Trump gave Benjamin Netanyahu the blessing or Israel attacked on their own while the ceasefire is in effect. Okay? Basically, Israel is going to take direct heat. Israel is going to take direct heat, and if we prove enough that the United States would resume engagements, Benjamin and Donald, they're both this. If the U.S. resumes engagements despite Israel breaking the ceasefire, both Benjamin and Donald are complicit. Okay. But if the U.S. does not and terminates all engagements, not terminates all engagements, terminates all conflict against Iran entirely, and denounces Israel, they have to be in the same package. If they stop the engagement and Israel continues, the default action, the very action that the United States has to do, is denounce Israel. Entirely denounce Israel. But is the U.S. going to do this? We don't know yet. But considering that the ceasefire is in danger of being null and void because of Israel's actions, they either have to resume engagements with no other choice in mind, or entirely denounce Israel because hitting civilian targets like this is never going to help. It is never going to help.
On in flames. Israeli bombs killing hundreds of civilians. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy saying it's hard to believe that a rushed agreement doesn't seem to be holding. Former Republican strategist Rick Wilson laying it all at the feet of Trump.
Trump has this up so left, right, and sideways. He has no idea how to escape the trap he's put America in.
Iran's prime minister saying those Israeli attacks in Lebanon violate the ceasefire, rendering negotiations meaningless.
There it is.
Reminding the states that Iran's hands are still on the trigger. Vice President J.D. Vance responding, well, if you want to let this all fall apart over Lebanon...
That's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb, but that's their choice.
Some saying...
What do you mean that's their choice? It's entirely because there needs to be a ceasefire to prevent civilian casualties. But there still is civilian casualties. There is still the reality of civilian casualties even when the ceasefire is in effect. Isn't the United States caring enough of civilian casualties? What is J.D. Vance saying? You know, even if J.D. Vance does not want the U.S. to go boots on the ground against Iran, I feel that his tone, his speech, just tells me that he just fucking does not care about civilian casualties whatsoever. Well, because he's not president, of course. But god damn the tone. I hate the tone. I hate this.
The White House would rather let Iran close Hormuz again than let Israel stop its killing. One of the hosts of the independent political podcast, Breaking Point, saying, what does it say about the US that we're willing to blow up the global economy over Israel's desire to ethically cleanse and annex half of Lebanon?
Basically, the United States does not have control of Israel at this point, okay?
The Israeli Prime Minister going viral for multiple comments, this one that the war will continue at any time he chooses.
Benjamin Netanyahu rejects President Trump's ceasefire and says the war will continue against Iran at any time we choose. United States, please denounce Israel for the good of the world, for the good of stability in the Middle East. Denounce Israel. America, entirely, please. Denounce Israel. This is never going to help your case in the Middle East. This is never going to help your case. Netanyahu says he will achieve his objectives through further military action under his command, unless there is an overthrow in Israel. There has to be an overthrow in Israel. This has to effectively stop everything. This has all got to stop.
We are ready to resume the fighting at any moment. Our finger is on the trigger.
Bernie Sanders, unsurprised and pushing back. We cannot allow Israel to continue shaping US military and foreign policy. Far-right political activist Laura Loomer has the air of the president, and she sees this all differently, saying Iran is now more legitimized and emboldened than ever before. They cannot be negotiated with, only destroyed. Destruction that the president says he's ready to resume if need be, bigger, better, and stronger. For Trump, America is back.
Alex Baird with that report. Well, that's all from the team here in Washington, D.C. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the US and influence the world. If you want to catch up on this episode, check out our YouTube, aljazeera.com. That's all.
I'm going to be honest with you guys. I believe that this ceasefire would be null and void, considering that why is America allowing this? This is just entirely Donald Trump and the yes men and the echo chamber. This is entirely supposed to be in his control, but he should have called Benjamin the moment that he agreed to the ceasefire. He should have called Benjamin to stop all attacks. All attacks. He has that power, but he just lets Benjamin Netanyahu be. Who does he think Benjamin Netanyahu is? His partner or his master? Because I'm going to be real with you. The only thing that I actually think about Donald Trump right now is he is a moron and he is a bitch for Israel. There's no doubt what's happening right now is absolutely because Israel pulled the United States in, acting on premature intelligence that there is a possible nuclear weapon already in development in Iran. That's the only reason why the United States is entirely involved in Middle Eastern conflict right now. Simply because Israel says so. America, as much as I want to believe that you are actually going to conduct and negotiate during the ceasefire, the best thing you can do right now is remove Donald Trump from power and entirely denounce Israel. That's the only way you would ever seek any type of redemption. Because at this point, there's no redeeming the United States. Not with Trump in power, not with his yes men still in office, not with his yes men still holding positions. In other words, America has got to purge its own leadership. They've got to restart from scratch.